perhaps senior voices in the party, maybe parts of the party cadre base and activists who would have felt, look, this is unknown territory for us. There are now 2 seats in the hands of the opposition. Let's hold back, let's rethink. But there are various people, Mr. Lee included, but not limited to him, who felt that we need to press on, partly because the 1984 vote is a generational vote as well. It shows that times are changing and we need to move and be cognizant of this. It was becoming clear internally that Dr. Goh Keng Swee was stepping out or was stepping down just before that. So, given that, I think it was necessary to push or propel people like Dr. Tony Tan, Mr. Goh Chok Tong to the front. And I think it's very much the party's thinking, party leadership, that you better blood these people sooner rather than later, because we, meaning the party leadership, wants to know, can these people sink or swim in the cauldron of politics? If they can't make it, we better know sooner rather than later. It was never a schism within the party, because even people like Mr. Ong Pang Boon and Dr. Toh Chin Chai agreed intellectually and conceptually with the need for renewal. It was more the tempo where some elections, in particular 84, and then later on, where people who are in the position of having given from a young stage, 60s, their lives to the party without much by way of educational qualifications or indeed other opportunities outside, suddenly get told, sometimes at the last minute, look, you're going to retire, thank you for your service to the party. For the political leadership, these are people who had strived together. They had seen off various challenges, the issues concerning survival. Would Singapore actually make it? 60s, maybe early 70s. And in the earlier stage, fighting off, facing down and winning against the pro-communists and the Barisan as well. They've been through the cauldron of fire and withstood it, and they've been through together. Many of them felt that having done this and still being capable and still having a certain vigor and energy, so let's do renewal, but does it have to be so quick? When it comes to Mr. Lee, Colonel Lee, later General Lee being interviewed by the CEC, it's not just the particular nature of the reservation raised by Mr. Ong. I mentioned in the book that at around this time, he's also on the ground giving a couple of speeches, more than one, concerning various things, but giving his own view that the older generation should not be cast aside, and also suggesting that while intellectually he's willing to do so, there's this issue of dynastic succession, and he's warning about the dangers of dynastic succession. He's reflecting sentiment from the ground. Whether you like it or not, Mr. Lee is who he is. He's a very well-credentialed SAF general, but he's also the son of someone who is Singapore's modern founding father. It's not necessarily that the 2 points of view have to cancel each other out. I think it was necessary to put both points of view out there. And years ago in 2011, when Mr. Lee briefed me on the project, there were others there as well, and there was this question, before we look at records, we better speak to people who are still around. And he immediately said, Ong Pang Boon, you have to speak to Ong Pang Boon. And in fact, that's the only name I believe he mentioned by name at that first pre-session. So he himself, I think, noted the importance of this. Out of every 10 people approached, one would agree to, I think, be formally considered as part of the process. That's the 1990s. That's not really a very, very high hit rate. It's quite clear that the party has its own means and ways to sort of get around that. One is, if you are asked and you consider really high quality caliber, you ask, you might, no, I don't want to do it. I'm sorry, my family, my kids are young, and so on. And the party may, well, we could ask the next person, and the next person after but it will go down, and necessarily the people are not going to be as good as we go down the list because you're at the top of our list. So the lines might go in. What future does that portend for Singapore? We repeatedly have to do this. And of course, some are convinced by these lines, and some have themselves benefited from various aspects of the system, government scholarships early on in their life, and they feel, okay, now it's time to give back. But this has become harder and harder over time. That group, which is diverse, maybe millennial thinking, or much more generational, aspirational, or experiential, shall we say, in their candidates, they are going to want a lot of things. And this is new. I mean, you've seen some of this in the 2020 election, where it's very clear that some of the PAP candidates were not just worthy candidates, but they've been through, shall we say, some difficulties, or unconventional / not quite normal cookie-cutter PAP diet. They've been through interesting things in their lives, right? The opposition, which also had this, in particular the WP slate of candidates, was able to sell it in, to me, what was a somewhat more interesting way. Even though not all of them grew up poor or that indigent or went through that many difficulties, I think it was actually kind of even, because on both sides you had actually some who came from well-to-do families. So it's also an issue relating to relatability and authenticity, especially authenticity. It's always kind of been there. It was kind of there in the 2011 election as well, but I've never seen this authenticity card be as important to the electorate as it was in 2020. The strongman politics is not going to work. Just look at the aspirations of the younger generation. It's much more reasonable to suggest that, well, you will have a prime minister, and the prime minister will be fully vested with the powers of, and I think likely a PM for future years to come. Much more collegial, if you like. I'm not saying necessarily that much flat. Of course, the PM will be above, but collegial, and the sense that consultation and decision making will be based on this, partly at least this collegiality. It's quite clear that some of this is already in place. The way whoever the 3 or 4 4G leaders who are in the mix, who are in the frame, work anyway in the ministerial task force and so on and so forth. It's not one person towering above the rest. I think people are getting used to the idea that when the individual is eventually chosen, it is going to be like that.